Good day, everyone. This is Candice here again from Dance NYC. I'm the manager of Justice, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives, and thank you for coming back to day 2 of the 2021 Symposium. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a Black, non-disabled woman of Caribbean heritage. Today, I'm wearing a blue and white and pink sweater. I have a tan shirt on. I'm wearing red lipstick, brown skin. My fro is pulled back, little auburn that's growing out at the ends. And I'm in a white room with the Dance NYC Symposium logo off to my left and the Artists Are Necessary Workers photo to my right. I'm currently on the Lenape Hoking, and I've been here for about 15 years now working. And I just want you to acknowledge the Indigenous land that you are currently on. So if you're in the chat, drop it in the chat so we know where you are and we can acknowledge where we are. Thank you again to River for sharing the land acknowledgement that they shared yesterday at our opening event. And you can also visit an excerpt of their presentation in the HOVA platform at, I believe it's listed at 9 a.m. on the agenda. So thank you for joining us for the symposium. As we are at the mercy of technology, we want to remind you that there may be delays, sound issues, changing circumstances that may occur during our time together. This is a fully digital event, so we hope that everything goes well, but we know that often things don't always go as planned. So we thank you for your grace and patience so far. Second, our friends from LC Interpreting Services, Aisha is here with us, and closed captioning provided by Viscardi Center is going to be available throughout the session. We will post speaker information in the description below, and you can also visit more information about that in the attendees section if you want to find the speakers and more information about them. This is also available on our website. Third, feel free to post in the comments as we talk. So chat amongst yourselves in the chat. If you have questions, you can post them in the Q&A section of HOVA, which is towards the right side of your screen. Dance NYC moderators will be there. There will be dedicated time for Q&A today. So we will be carrying the questions from the chat to the speakers so that they can probably answer some of your questions. Once we're done today, and you want to keep talking about this topic, feel free to go to the session follow-up for this session, and you can keep talking about any learnings or revelations that you have. Lastly, we hope that you'll help us to amplify these conversations. So tag us on Instagram at dance.nyc, Twitter at dance.nyc, Facebook at dance/NYC, and use the hashtag DanceSimp so that we can find you and you can find each other. And now, and before we go into our first panel, I just want to take a moment of silence to recognize the extreme violence that has taken place in the Asian American community. 6 women were murdered. So I just want us to take a quick pause right now to acknowledge what has happened and to send love to all of the people in the community who are extremely hurt and devastated by this news and by the ongoing violence and xenophobia that has happened over the last year. So one moment of silence. Thank you, everybody. And with that, we turn to our topic for today, Dance to Abolition, Liberation, Decolonization, and Reparations. The social justice uprisings of 2020 have brought many justice-related movements into greater popular discourse and consideration. What do these concepts and many more mean individually, and how do they relate to our work in the dance field? This session will take a deeper look, giving us an entry point to action in conversation with artists. So I'd love to welcome our moderator for today's discussion, Abou Farman, to lead us in this topic. Welcome, Abou.
Hello, thank you, Candice. Thank you, Dance NYC, for inviting me and putting together this panel as well as the whole symposium, and for doing the work, the good work year in and year out. I'm Abou Farman. I'm an anthropologist and artist. I am of Middle Eastern descent. I have long black hair, round glasses, cold hands. I am up in between Mohican and Munsee Lenape territory, according to the research. And I also want to acknowledge that this acknowledgement is in no way a replacement for the political and strategic work that needs to be done for land rematriation and redistribution in all domains. I'm the founder of Artspace Sanctuary, and we work towards ending border regimes, violent border regimes, and prison and detention with a focus on undocumented populations. And part of the goal is to mobilize art spaces in this direction to become sanctuary spaces, to take on sanctuary principles, and which we think of and work alongside abolitionist principles as well, and abolitionist strategies. In that, honoring that, I just want to also say that we should, all of us here, declare our space, virtual as it is, a sanctuary space for the duration, at least, of our being together in communion today. Dance NYC usually in their symposiums, when it's in person, declares the conference a sanctuary conference. It goes through training with us in order to make sure that the space is safe for everybody. And so I think I just want to say that this is, announce this as a safe space. We will keep each other safe, and safe regardless of our status in front of the law and the state, regardless of race and ability and sexuality, and that our participation here should be free of fear, and that if there are any people who are working with police or border patrol agencies or other coercive arms of the state, we want you to declare yourselves if you are in the audience, and in order to maintain our safety here. So I'll just say a little bit, I'll be moderating, I'll just be saying a little bit about the work and then introducing the speakers, and we'll move from there. We think of sanctuary here as both a sort of a goal and strategy as well. Sanctuary for all is a vision where people will be safe from state violence that's rooted, as we know, in racism and racial capitalism, and it's about the protection of class inequalities and corporate power. And so undoing all of that, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore has said, requires also undoing society as it's been arranged for us and its laws. And so we work with organizations like Dance NYC to put together both programs and trainings and institutional structures that create the conditions to move in that direction, towards that and towards those goals. We've also worked against organizations, including organizations like MoMA and PS1 and the Whitney, because these end up being masks of the carceral regime. So I just want to bring that up because that's ongoing work, and invite people to think about it and join it. So the work that we do in this direction, again, is the work of decolonizing, the work of abolishing, is partly practical. It's working on the material conditions of policing and the carceral state, but it's also ideological in that changing, that requires also changing desires, our views, our hierarchical views, and in a way decolonizing our minds, as they say, so that we are not turning to places like MoMA as the ultimate goal where we really need to end up, we think, right? And I'm bringing up MoMA because the board of MoMA is made up of some pretty horrible people, war profiteers tied to sex trafficking, to owners of private prisons, to Trump allies, to union busters, debt vultures, and it goes on. And the same people also happen to be on the board of the New York Police Foundation. That is not a coincidence. That's all I have to say by way of introduction. I want to just quickly say that the panelists are four. There will be DeeArah Wright, Changemaker and social entrepreneur, Jonathan González, a multidisciplinary artist and educator, Iakowi, executive director of American Indian Community House, and Niamh Young, movement artist, community organizer, and graduate of the Union Theological Seminary. We're really looking forward to this conversation, but we will start first with Christina Dawkins, whom I've worked with in the past on some campaigns. Christina is the founder of A for Abolitionists. I will now pass the mic on to Christina, so Christina can take us through some of the background, some of the ways in which we are thinking about abolition and decolonization to launch us into the rest of the panel. Okay, Christina, it's yours.
Thank you, Abou, and thank you all for having me to talk about this wonderful connection between the work of abolition, continuing the abolition movement and incorporating it into movement and dance. So yes, my name is Christina Dawkins and my pronouns are she, her. I'm currently in Barcelona, Spain, and I am a Black non-disabled person. I'm wearing a peach sweater and a black and gold headband, and my background is blurred, so I didn't have to straighten up my apartment. So I'm an abolitionist, and I always like to lead with that, in part to acknowledge that slavery is very much alive today, and also to share that I approach this work from a radical perspective. I founded A for Abolitionists, which is a social justice consultancy to advance human rights by combating forms of modern day slavery. And I collaborate with educators and creatives to build social justice programs. Currently, I'm working on a project called Mapping Modern Day Slavery, where I connect human trafficking, punitive incarceration, and immigrant detention into a visual systems map to better understand these complex systems and how they all rely on the same system of racial oppression. So I'm going to just give a general background about what does abolition mean, what is going on in social movements today. We're in an historic time and place. The movement for Black Lives is currently the largest protest movement in US history, larger than the civil rights movement. And the movement for Black Lives not only describes the social movement, but it also is the name of an umbrella organization that's a network of organizations that have come out of this racial unrest and uprisings that we've seen. So Black Lives Matter, BYP 100, Black Futures Lab, many more, they're all abolitionist organizations. So I'm going to talk about what that means. So I'm going to start with some key definitions. And if I could get the slide up and go to the second slide. rate. So this slide has definitions and statistics with a photo of an old ball and chain to illustrate the continuation of chattel slavery, which is how we traditionally think about slavery. Chattel slavery is slavery on the basis of a condition that someone has, a status. So transatlantic antebellum slavery was race-based. It was based on the condition of being of African descent. And it's throughout your life, and it was passed down to children. Forms of modern day slavery include human trafficking, which is, it looks like sex trafficking, labor trafficking, sex labor trafficking, and also organ trafficking. Those are all forms. Punitive incarceration in the United States, which I'll get into more. Immigrant detention, particularly in the United States, which I'll explain more of. And the one that I won't talk much about is forced marriage, because it's not a prevalent issue in the United States. However, a lot of folks became aware of the issue of forced marriage around Bring Back Our Girls a few years ago, when schoolgirls were taken. So there are more people living under modern day slavery than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So between 1525 and 1866, about 12 million Africans were shipped to the Americas. In contrast, there are currently over 45 million people all around the world in over 167 countries who are living under some form of modern day slavery. Next slide, please. So punitive incarceration, as many of you know, is a form of slavery because it's just defined in the Constitution of the United States. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. So the 13th Amendment did not abolish slavery, it abolished chattel slavery. And it is perfectly legal to continue in the form of punishment for a crime that someone's been convicted of. In 2018, there were over 2 million people in America who were incarcerated, and that is almost 4 times as many people who are living under chattel slavery when it was legal. Immigrant detention makes the figure even higher when you factor in the over 500,000 people who were held in immigrant detention in the United States 2 years ago now. So nearly 70% of the folks who were held in immigrant detention were held in private facilities where companies make money based on headcount. And I'll get into more of why that's so problematic a little bit later. But all these forms, human trafficking, punitive incarceration, immigrant detention, are closely related. And they rely on the same system of racism and racial oppression and white supremacy, which are the powers that we need to really bring down. So what is the prison industrial complex? Next slide, please. So the prison industrial complex is how the state now persecutes and hyper-criminalizes not only Black people, but all marginalized populations. And it grew from chattel slavery to convict leasing into what is now mass incarceration that began in the 1970s and continued with Nixon, Reagan, Clinton, using dog whistle politics, war on drugs, tough on crime, 3 strikes law, broken windows policing, to hyper-criminalize communities of color and throw people into prisons in order to make a profit and really drive our capitalist society. Next slide, please. So the result is a massive problem. There are not only over 2 million people currently incarcerated, there's another nearly 5 million people on parole or probation. So while we only make up 4.4% of the world's population, we incarcerate, there are 22% of the world's incarcerated population is in the United States. So how does it operate? Next slide. So this all operates by criminalizing the poor. What this graph illustrates is that people in local jails are locked up simply because they can't afford to pay bail. And it shows that 37% of people who are in jails had no chance of being able to afford bail, which is typically $10,000, because that's more than what they make in the entire year. So that's basically how it operates in a very general term, and it leads to a lot of legal forms of discrimination, which the next slide illustrates. There are over 50,000 ways to legally discriminate against someone who has been incarcerated or convicted of a crime or in immigrant detention. And that's in housing, where you can live, education, what schools you can get into. Do you have to check that box that says you've been previously convicted of a crime? In jobs, of course, the box is there as well. And what we have become very aware of in the past few months is disenfranchisement. It's a key way to disenfranchise large groups and powerful sectors in key states. It corresponds with how gerrymandering and how those lines are drawn to determine who represents who and who doesn't get represented. So that's punitive incarceration. I'm going to quickly explain how immigrant detention is an outgrowth. Next slide, please. So immigrant detention centers are jails. This is a photo of an ICE detention center, and they're not only just modeled off of jails and prisons, they literally are built in the same structures, and the same companies that run many ICE detention centers also run private prisons. So there are nearly 200 federal detention centers in the United States, and this is where people who are suspected of violating US immigration laws wait for court hearings to see if they'll stay in the United States or be deported. And while they wait, many folks work in what's considered a voluntary work program where they clean, cook, do laundry, keep the facility running. And for their labor, they're paid around $1 a day or just 13 cents per hour. And this is supposed to sort of move immigrant detention away from being involuntary servitude, which is slavery. However, it still violates the 13th Amendment of the Constitution because these folks haven't been convicted of any crime. And they're not being paid minimum wage. And so there's really just no legal protection for these types of practices. The next slide, please. Here we see that not only the problem is that we're locking folks up for trying to exercise their human right to move, to seek asylum, but there's also an immense profit being gained off of simply detaining people. There are many jails, prisons, detention centers. They're built to save failing rural towns where the factories closed, and then they prop up a prisoner detention center and provide employment for a mostly white demographic. So this is another layer of poverty where to save predominantly white poor people, detaining Black and brown people is the solution. So we can go to the next slide, and then we're going to skip that one and talk about human trafficking. So the next one after that. Perfect. So the last component that I want to talk about is human trafficking. This is a graph with facts and figures that I'll explain. There are an estimated 40 million victims of human trafficking globally, and it's been steadily increasing for over 10 years. So there are hundreds of thousands of people estimated to be victims of human trafficking just in the United States. And it occurs in every state. There's really no place that is an exception. More than half of trafficking victims are sexually exploited. And in America, sex trafficking is a $32 billion industry. So this is a major issue in the US and as a place that receives a lot of people who are being trafficked and sends out a lot of folks who are being trafficked for sex, labor, and organ trafficking. So we're going to skip the next slide and go to the following one. Yes. So human trafficking, just like immigrant detention, is connected to the prison industrial complex. In 2015, which seems like such a long time ago, but there was a big surge in human trafficking as there was an influx of xenophobic ideas coming out of the Trump administration. So nearly 90% of survivors of sex trafficking reported being arrested at least once, 90%. And many sex trafficking victims get arrested dozens of times. So this rise is closely linked to the global increase of migrant workers and asylum seekers and refugees. So xenophobia and white nationalism go up. It makes movement more necessary, but also more dangerous. So as we're trying to crack down on human trafficking, we're also creating circumstances that bring it about. Because when there's a culture of bias and discrimination, people are prevented from seeking movement safely, and they distrust those that are supposed to be protecting them. And so to avoid immigrant detention, they may be trafficked. The humane methods for exercising your right of movement are not easily respected. So all three forms of modern day slavery in the US rely on the criminal legal system. And the last thing I'm going to share is how abolition is a solution. So the next slide. This is a famous quote from Audre Lorde. And it says, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So this was stated in a speech to a white women's literary society conference. The full quote is, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support." So basically, the abolition is saying reform is trying to fix a system that is broken, but the system isn't broken. It's actually doing exactly what it's meant to do. So if we reform it, the best thing we can do is recreate this very unjust system that we already have. So we have to dismantle the current systems and create a new system of justice built on equity that respects human rights, that respects human dignity. And alternatives already exist in other countries and in the United States in different forms. Rehabilitative justice, restorative justice, transformative justice, transitional, truth and reconciliation, reparations. These are all different options to punishment, which really creates more harm on top of the harm that's already been done. So I'm going to leave it there and come back during the Q&A. Thank you.
Please excuse me, I was muted. Hi, good morning. Very happy to be here. My name is Niamh Young. I am an African-American woman, pronoun she, her, hers. I am wearing a red sweatshirt with the word indigenize on it. I have my hair in cornrows with brown lipstick, and I am sitting in front of a white wall. I'm located in Brooklyn in Muncie Lenape land. And I am here representing myself, but also as the co-founder of In Liberated Company, as well as the founder of Spirit List. Thank you, so excited to be here.
Hi, good day, everyone. My name is DeeArah Wright, and I am a Black American woman, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a queer artist and social entrepreneur, and I'm currently living on Indigenous land, the land of the Mohegan people, also known as Southern Berkshires in Massachusetts. I am non-disabled, and my skin is brown, and my head is shaved. I'm wearing a sweatshirt, the color of a blue sky and white fluffy clouds. Behind me is some pillows. I'm in a reading nook in the playroom that I share with my cooperative pod members. And I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you.
Sego, Sewagwego. My name is Iakowi Hina Oaks. I'm the executive director of the American Indian Community House. I'm also the founder of the North American Indigenous Center for Culture, Equity, and Economic Development. I am currently in Manhattan, which is the land of the Lenape, and I am from Akwesasne Mohawk territory, which is just north of here. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody who invited me here, and thank you to everybody who is watching. This is a really tough time for me, as I imagine it is for others. I want to acknowledge International Women's Month, and also along with that, acknowledge the difficulties we have as women, queers, LGBTQ folks, anybody who experiences gender violence, particularly the Asian women in the past couple of days. I want to acknowledge the racism, violence, and discrimination that we all face as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I want us to think really deeply about that and what we're going to do about that, and how we can work together. Sorry, having a rough day here. I'm non-disabled. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I come from a Mohawk family, also known as Ganyageha, which is Mohawk is a part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. And I come from a long line of Snipe clan. Snipe clan is the family that I originate from. And to be Snipe clan, you inherit that from your matrilineal lineage. So that's another thing that I'm not sure if people know who are on this land during International Women's Month. This land is matrilineal. It's always been the northeastern region is matrilineal. That means women have equal parts in leading, in governance, and are the landowners because we carry the future in our wombs. So I think during this month, that's one of the most important things that women need to understand to empower themselves, but also others should know who are occupying this land. I want to acknowledge the missing and murdered Indigenous women who like we are constantly targeted and are seeing no justice. I want people to think about ways in which they can become more aware of what's actually happening around them in society that you do not see because we have been erased. And I want to think about decolonizing. What are you filling yourself with? You know, if you're decolonizing, what are you then filling yourself with? What are you filling that void with? In my life, I feel like I've been on a journey of indigenizing, and the active reclamation, reclaiming our traditions, our languages, food sovereignty, dances, ceremony, governance, and the great law of peace, Goa, which is something else everybody in this space and in the Northeastern territory of Turtle Island need to understand, that the great law of peace was the law of this land. It was the governance that was pre-colonial, maintaining peace and unity amongst our nations, because there are plenty of nations surrounding you. And one of the main tenets of the great law of peace, the Goa, is that we're matrilineal.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you to Dance NYC. Thank you to Candace's opening. Thank you to Abou's opening. Thank you to Christina. Thank you to the other speakers. My name is Jonathan González. I'm a teacher. I'm a student. I'm an artist, a cultural organizer, and a farmer. My pronouns are they and them. I'm a non-disabled person. I'm currently on Nuwu Southern Paiute territory and typically reside on Lenape and Canarsie territories, wherein I am part of the land back strategies facilitated through Northeast Farmers of Color Network. And I also want to emphasize and share in the words that Ava opened today in thanking River for naming and inviting in the solidarities that we can have with the greater work of Indigenous sovereignty. I am a dulce de leche Black Caribbean by way of a Haitian border town named Castanuela. I'm a genderqueer New Yorker in a cream yellow button down, wearing frameless glasses and a messy fro top with shaved sides and a beard, sitting in a room with white walls on light and earthy green pillows, with two collage paintings behind me of orange, black, blues, and whites, with a figuration of children smiling. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Oh, I think I'm doing my 9 minutes, so I'll begin. Thank you for the first slide. We are in sync. Okay, so my first slide here, and I will just start my timer because I am apt to overtalk. My first slide here says, our title today, Dance to Abolition, Liberation, Decolonization, and Reparations. And behind it is an image that is a painterly figuration. And it's documenting Bois, which, if you do know, was the ceremony, the gathering of dance, of smoke, of sacrifice, of drink that led to the Haitian Revolution. And thinking with Dr. Cox last evening about bodies at the front line, spirits at the center, I offer this image as a North Star to perhaps think through, as a dance artist in this dance ecology space, what is the history of dance showing up at the front lines and meeting us at where we are, which is to say, the transformative moment we're in. Can I go to the next slide, please? So structurally, I'm going to offer in these 9 minutes a series of provocations and not answers. And I look forward to speaking in other places like the debrief later or in the world about how we continue to struggle towards those answers and solutionary thinking. But my umbrella terminology, both in my spirit and in community, are wondering what happens after property and making a question for the uses and the violences of property. And there are 3 tiers for this in my presentation. One being individual, which I mean artist. 2, institutional, which can also mean the programmatic and physical site of institutions, cultural centers. And 3, a question of structure, which is cultural stewardship, philanthropy, and the asymmetrical power relationships inflected by that, which Abou stated so clearly in terms of some of the more vile institutions that produce those kind of violences. Can I go to the next slide, please? And here is an image of two revolutionary activists who are my North Stars, Grace Lee Boggs and Jimmy Boggs, who ended their lives in Detroit, Michigan, what is known as Detroit, Michigan now. And I want to just highlight this question as something perhaps that you leave, you take with you or you don't, as Sydney mostly invited us to last night. What time is it on the clock of the world? And this question is a recurring question that I think we need to ask ourselves, and I ask myself in terms of my engagements, to not take the habitual habits that the system will provide us. Next slide, please. So what time is it? Here are just a few examples that are rising for me. Some have already been stated, but abolition, and I give these citations as ways to move onward, not as the only. Change Everything, The Call to Change Everything by Ruth Wilson Gilmore. And what does that mean in terms of abolition, both in the way Christina has framed it as a structural question, but also in terms of an interpersonal interior question. Second, Indigenous sovereignty as it pertains to the work of Indian Collective and the Black Hills Land Back is something that I'm just highlighting for folks to continue to look deeper into and to see how they can be a part of those campaigns that are being. Thirdly, Black self-determination, and I'm naming Moms for Housing as a transformative moment that has come upon us in this past year, but there is a long history of community land trusts that are operating in New York City and otherwise that are calling upon new determinations where we live outside of the state. Fourthly, Black and Indigenous ecological remediation, and I am engaged in the work of being a farmer with folks like Soulfire Farm and Northeast Farmers of Color Network. And here the example I offer is Chris Newman's Sylvanaqua Farms, the Black Indigenous farm that is cultivating a long trial of land to try to seek out land back strategies that also heal the earth. Fifth, post-nationalism, which feels very generative, what happens after the nation. And as always, Haiti in the present coup against Jovenel Moïse has been at the forefront of making those questions for us internationally. And fifth, and this is not an exhaustive list, but gendered self-determination as we see operating right now at the front lines across the country. Can I go to the next slide? Thank you. Some more citations, feelings, North Stars. Sylvia Winter and her call for the third event. And what's most on top that I want to frame before I get to my experiences as it pertains to abolition and arts ecology is Sylvia Winter's call that culture will liberate us. It is both the capacity and the alignment of culture to make new forms of communication, to make new forms of vision, to make new forms of collectivity, if we choose to step into what is deemed unreal, unrealistic. And that call is a long call from the Caribbean to break with the pentameter. And it is a deep work, and it is a constant work that happens together and not alone. And in this image, Sylvia Winter is sitting in her office writing. Can we go to the next slide? This is an image from W.E. Du Bois. And I entitled this Spectacular Failures, which is a term that he rose in his thought when we began that shift, as Christina mentioned, out of chattel slavery into other forms of carceral logics. And in this image, W.E. Du Bois stands between the white planter class of the US and the Black and Indigenous communities who had been dispossessed, moving into this regime of carceral life after chattel slavery. And the call for Black reconstruction was one to figure out strategically how to integrate those who were dispossessed. And of course, this logic never happened. And I will get to, in the end, perhaps what we are inside of, Dylan Rodriguez mentions, as white reconstruction, which is the afterlife we are inside of. Can I go to the next slide? Okay, from experiences, I had the opportunity to be a part of an experiment in the 2020 year entitled Zero 2020 at an institution called Performance Space New York. And you will see in this slide, or I can describe in this slide, an image from Nandini Bagchi's counter institution, activist estates of the Lower East Side. In this image, you see a map of the 1970s, a constellation of cultural institutions involved in the insurgent activity of mutual aid and other kind of anarchist possibilities for collectivity. And this site, this time, has become a huge nostalgic flow for New York City, for dance ecologies. In this 2020 project that happened at Performance Space, a group of artists were brought contractually for a year with wage to think through new opportunities, new horizons for access, for program, for wage, for the arts ecology. And I want to name just a few pros. One, experimentation, a question of the organizational status quo, taking risk, which is something we are not deemed to do for many reasons in the cultural sector. Two, COVID occurred and the building shuttered and this process paused, but a group of us artists, and I'll name a few of those names of co-conspirators, Ripley Soprano, Monica Mirabile, Lou, Danielle Brown, Angel Robertson, Elle, Dante McKenzie, Stev, Rudy Gerson, Nadia Taikolsker, Al, Sarah Snyder, Anabe Sepulveda, Dada Kaz, and so many more names. This contingent responded as we could by taking over the building and producing a mutual aid hub, which included a harm reduction clinic, a DRS training and freedom school on abolitionist thinking, and a site for Black, queer, and trans people to find shelter, which included sustenance, a physical place to stay. So this kind of possibility of anarchist activity is not perhaps sustainable at all times, but calls upon us to be at the front lines as a cultural sector, to respond, as Abou has already mentioned for us. And lastly, what occurred in this insurgent activity was a call to trust a community, not to extract from a community, not to extract the aesthetics, not to extract the ways that we move in the world, but to trust and work in co-conspirator relationships about what we need and how we can trust each other as both being scholars, as thinkers, as artists. Next slide, please. Cons. These are the negatives that occurred, and negatives that I believe are patterns that continue to reappear. One, when the institution returned, meaning the executive class and the managerial class returned, there was a call to shift into a charity-based mindset, which means controlling the flow, controlling access, and deeming those of the community, those who were not contractually a part of the experiment of Zero 2020, as not being able as an expansive term, able to self-determine what they needed, able to be trusted as leaders, able to be believed in terms of a vision inside of the room. So shifting out of a charity-based mindset towards the risky and circuitous ways that we can be together when we think through abolition is something to hold. And I highlight here DeeArah and her book, The Point is to Change the World, the Guyanese activist who has now passed, who tells us through her work with Red Thread, with the Women's Project in Guyana and internationally, that we must trust those who are the most oppressed. They are the best scholars and the best visionaries for the future. The managerial class and those who are hyper-professional are not. Second point, Akan, ego, a lack of faith in intersectionality, which Combahee River Collective reminds us in so many ways. And part of this is moving away from the hyper-professionalization of the artists and obliterating that kind of individuation of practice. And I name some examples, the NDN Collective and Movement for Black Lives collaboration as one example, Sharita Town and Lisa Bates and Black Spatial Imaginary as another example of how to work alongside and with solidarity and difference and ground it in place-based specific work that does not highlight gain for just one person. Third point, classist, ableist, anti-Black, and anti-Indigenous, so all these interconnected prejudices in response to drug use, in response to varying abilities, in disability, in response to a notion of work. And this is primarily from administrators, from executives, from gatekeepers and the managerial class. And I want to highlight the work of junkie communism, of Carl Hart, and the decriminalization of drugs. When we think through solidarity in a cultural sector, when we think about the aesthetics that we prioritize, are we thinking about the ways that we are tone policing one another, are tone policing each other, facial policing one another, and creating another eye for the state in terms of how we monitor drug use, how we monitor our social activities together. And if we continue to maintain those kinds of carceral logics, we cannot get free. Next slide. So lastly, these are a few takeaways I just want to lift up. As I mentioned, White Reconstruction by Dylan Rodriguez perhaps is the time that we find ourselves now. First point being, what does it mean to avoid the neoliberal okey-doke of representation, meaning the epidermal logic of Black leadership, the epidermal logic of marginalized leadership does not always create the solutionary possibility. We need an analysis, and we need to struggle for that analysis collectively. Two, I want to lift up Amilcar Cabral's claim no easy victories as to mean claim no individual victories. We have to work towards those collective and rigorous strategies together. Third, what is the long arc of the foundation, of the grant, of the dispersal regimes connected to the state and the war machine? A lot of the logic that has come into the media space is trying to reproduce the WPA, the Workers' Progress Administration. And I ask us to think through how that administration both reproduces extracting radical aesthetics from revolutionary thinkers, artists, and cultural workers, while also creating a chokehold on the actual total recall those revolutionary thinkers are thinking through, which means a call for land back, a call for an end to police, etc. Lastly, what is the extractive investment of the foundations, and how can we be aware in our engagement as foundation workers, as people who interface with those regimes, to do otherwise or to obliterate them altogether? And to not, when I say obliterate, it's not a negative, it's a possibility to grow that otherwise that Audre Lorde is calling upon. Next and last slide. Thank you. That's the end.
Hi, everyone. Jonathan, thank you so much for diving in and offering so many beautiful opportunities to question, and your framework is very inspiring as well. So thank you so much. And I would like to just restate a question, an essential question that was shared in preparation to speak about this idea of how does, about our work and our practice and the greater art and dance ecology. So the question that we are exploring is, what does abolition, liberation, decolonization, and reparations mean for me, my work and my practice, and what do they mean within art and dance ecology. So as I was really thinking about how to take such a very layered and complex and also beautifully important and integral question, and think about how it to create offerings and to share something that's really relevant to what I'm working on right now. I thought about 3 words that will root what I'm sharing today. The first word being embody, the second word being response, and the third word being home. So starting with embody, as a mover and dancer who I've really, through freestyle movement and improvisation, and whether it was through movement ritual or dancing in community, in the house community, singing in New York and everywhere, and I could find that community, as well as growing up in the South and witnessing people catch the spirit in my home Baptist church. There's something really important to this concept, or this real feeling within my body of being able to access liberation in my body. And so what does it mean to, through dance, through movement, to be able to access that experience, that liberation, that light, and then also therefore be able to connect with others who are sharing that experience. And I feel that in this work, whether it's organizing, creating new models of relating with each other and living together, and new systems that are equitable and sustainable, being able to access that liberation within myself and with others, is that reminder that, like, that is what we're made of. This is actually what we're made of. The violence, all these other things that are looking to distract us from the work of the light work and that which we are at the core. That is, I think it's a really integral part of us being able to sustain, not burn out, keep the faith, and remember who we are in this work, and be able then to find others who are organizing with this same spirit. One of my great friends, who's also a dancer and mover, who once told me that, wow, you really seem to live the way that you move. And so I really think a lot about how to consistently and intentionally do that, and how that can start with me embodying a sense of liberation and looking to that, looking to others to see that reflection and to therefore organize with others in that way. The second word, respond, which in my work around in education, whether that was working in the Freedom Schools Project in Maryland years ago, or helping elementary students learn how to read, or facilitating learning around dance and social change, or facilitating a community conversation around reparations when I was co-director with Jack. There's a certain responsibility around being able to be responsive and to practice deep listening. So what does it mean to listen deeply in a way that we don't look for prescriptive ways in thinking about how we need to respond to a challenge or respond in a moment to what we need to happen for ourselves and our communities, but how can we be very culturally responsive and responsive in a holistic way in order to facilitate education and learning experiences that can allow for an opening for more opportunity for us to be in solidarity with each other. And the third word, home, which for me, and thinking about how sometimes the arts sector is seen as this, again, this idea of sections or sectors, is that within the ecosystem of the arts and dance, thinking about arts and artists as part of a interconnected ecosystem of who we all are, And if we're centering home and what it means to be at home within our bodies and in our dance communities and our wider communities, how do we create those courageous spaces? How do we relate and create family and then decide what we will make together, what our work will be together? So in the midst of this, right now I'm currently a part of a project that has been in development for some years called Dandelion Homesteads. We are in a development mode, and in the Berkshires right now, we are in the midst of launching our first homestead. And our Dandelion Homesteads is a cooperative ecosystem, a developing cooperative ecosystem of land co-stewarded by Black, Indigenous, and people of color members. And these members, we are deciding to thrive and create home together. This ecosystem is and will be powered by Black and Indigenous wisdom, values, and strategies for sustainability and self-determination. So with this first homestead that we're developing here, it is a farm homestead, but it is a farm homestead that will be rooted in practice and programming that reflects activism, the arts, healing modalities, and other things that are about what it means to create a sanctuary and home that is rooted in recognizing how we are all complex. The current structure of that, and to speak, in support of what Jonathan was sharing too, and think about new models, is it is a cooperative model. So I invite you to look more into those structures. Folks like New Economy Coalition has really great resources about how to think about cooperative structures, especially in thinking about organizing as in the dance community or other ways of organizing in community. And so within that, as we create these new systems and these new ideas, and for us, this new idea of home, and then the other part of that is making sure that those white folks and others who have benefited from the systems that have perpetuated colonization and systemic isms, fear-based ideology, white supremacy, have the responsibility to be accountable to the sustainability and development of these new systems and investing in these systems, and also divesting from systems of oppression. So as we think about this particular project that we're doing, we are exploring community land trust model, and we are exploring other ways to continue to develop, grow, and thrive in ways that are rooted in those values that are sustainable to us and sustainable for what it means to embody our principles, to move and respond in ways that feel liberatory and that are rooted in this idea of sovereignty that is not connected to a sense of oppression. So if folks want to be in touch, because we're in development mode and you'd like to be connected to that process later, learn more about what we're doing when we launch officially, the email is dandelionhomesteads@gmail.com. And I'll end there, and thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, DeeArah. Thank you, Jonathan. I wanted to just jump straight into the question and to repeat what that was again. Thank you, DeeArah, for putting that out there. What does abolition, liberation, decolonization, and reparations mean for you, your work, and your practice? I think for me, simply put, it means that we're all deeply engaged in the work of decentralization, and that is decentralizing the experiences, the histories, and probably most importantly, the imaginations of whiteness that undergird, as far as I can see, the pathways to the future. And so for me, it's an undoing and unlearning a thorough practice of deconstruction and eventually reconstruction. For me specifically, the point of departure, the jumping off point is through the sacred arts. I believe that ideas of the divine, ideas of the sacred, or in other words, what or who is precious and should be preserved. These ideas are always disseminated through the arts. Whether you're looking at sacred text or the Bible, Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, they all employ the literary arts. We know what we know of Egyptian astrology and cosmology and community life through hieroglyphs and artifacts that have been found in the tombstones of ancient dignitaries. Visual art has always spread ideas of who's sacred. In other words, who's important, what's important. But it also, visual art also has a way of concretizing imaginations of divinity, of sacredness, of hierarchy, of relation. And through that concretization, an othering is forged, and that othering is often projected onto the bodies of women, the bodies of people of color, poor folk, disabled bodies, and queer identified bodies. I view performance as a way to deconstruct from those concretizations, kind of a process of liquidity. Performance for me is a world building tool and really an ontological tool where on the stage, in this space that we get to create and control the elements and control the textures and quality of the relationships on stage. All of these allow us to reimagine the nature of being and to reimagine it as something outside of Eurocentrism. So my movement practice is often an opportunity to exercise the imagination of abolition, of liberation, decolonization, and reparations. In my personal practice, that looks like studying religious and spiritual ritual, looking at the performativity of it, and not solely as a witness, but as someone who aims to deeply understand how ritual shapes community and the relationships therein. In 2019, I graduated from Union Theological Seminary with my master's in theology, performance, and ritual. And I was so surprised to go there and find so many other artists who were working at the intersections of spirituality and art, but also to find dancers who were already a part of the New York dance community. That was really, really exciting. And so since then, artistic projects have taken on a new form, and I'd love to just talk very quickly about a few of those, just to get a sense of how these two worlds interact and how dance, art, and spirituality contributes to a liberation theology. So last year at was this Judson? Yeah, last year at Judson Church, in collaboration with a few other artists, I was a part of a program called Black Women as Sacred Text. This was a Sunday service. And actually took the time in the space that the Sunday service would have. And our only task was to bring our best creative selves to the space and not make it look like a regular Sunday service. And what happened in that space, I think, was just unbelievable. We had jazz musicians who came in and did renditions of jazz versions of the Song of Solomon. We had dancers who performed. I myself performed an improv of an ancestral altar building. We had a group of circle singers who engaged the congregation to form a song, a melody, a harmony all together as a group. It was a beautiful service. And at the end, there was a woman an elder woman who apparently had been attending Judson since the 80s, who came up and expressed that, since she's been there since the 80s, she'd never experienced anything like that. But more importantly, that she had never been charged with the question of what bodies are sacred. And she didn't have to think about that, or she wasn't inspired to think about that until there was a service about Black women being sacred and our experiences as being sacred text. And so I say all of that to say, there are opportunities to engage interfaith communities and to tap into the liberation theology through interfaith engagement and contemporary reimaginings of liturgy, ritual, and for me, that's through both the traditional African and Judeo-Christian ritual, and basically just looking at practices of self-sustenance. I think I have one more minute, and the last thing I wanted to speak on is another project called In Liberated Company that is a community dance community for folks who are religious trauma survivors. And this is really about using movement and somatics to undo and unlearn certain stories and narratives about our bodies, how they can move, how they should move, what you should do to them, and more importantly, how you listen to the body as a tool of agency. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, I just, well, thank you for all of that, everybody. There's so much in here, although I do feel like because there was a little bit of confusion right at the beginning, I think Iakowi maybe didn't get as much of an opportunity to finish what she had started talking about. And so I apologize for that confusion, but I wanted to offer a couple of minutes for Iakowi to because she sort of stopped abruptly. I wanted to make sure that they have the opportunity to say what they need to say right now for a couple of minutes before we head. I know we're short on time, but I just wanted to offer that space.
Okay, Yawagoa. Yeah, sorry about the confusion, everybody. There's just a few more important points that I want to make. So in regards to abolition, liberation, decolonization, and reparations, all of those things are, for me, things that I embody in the work that I do every day. I rarely speak about them. I'm more about doing and applying and trying to make an impact in community. I do this work at the American Indian Community House, but prior to that, I've been doing it all of my life as a Ungwehue woman, Ungwehue meaning original people of this land in Akina Mohawk language. This has been my life. It's been survival. It's been in survival mode. It's been here in the northeastern sector of Turtle Island, which we are all at now. I think it's important to take a really good look around you, who's in close proximity to you, meaning like which tribal communities and reservations are like just in New York State and any other state that you've lived in before, lands you've occupied before, and acknowledge all of that, because it doesn't start and end here in New York City. Your entire lives and the generations prior to you, you know, where did you live? Who was removed for you to have the privilege to occupy that land and space? And think about what that's done to my people, to the different nations that are surviving today. I'm not sure if people know what Indian country is, but Indian country is a political, it's a political, I guess, collective of federally and state recognized nations within the United States. And for us also extends to First Nations in Canada. And there's a lot of issues with the arts community and just economics in general that are really stricken against us and exclude us. So when doing work and trying to be inclusive or diverse or claiming BIPOC, I want to acknowledge when we were once lowercase I in BIPOC, representing Indigenous. That one kind of hurt. We all felt it. There's going to have to be some reconciling behind that, a little bit more than making it uppercase I, and actually being inclusive. What I'm experiencing and seeing is a lot of misappropriation of funds, grants, and just misappropriation of who we are and what those grants and opportunities and employments were intended to do, which was to offer reparations and inclusion for American Indians / Alaskan Natives. That's the political term / category for who we are within the United States. And who we are also in the United States is we are sovereign nations within a nation. So I do not prefer to be called indigenous. Indigenous is a dangerous word for me. And for a lot of folks from my nation and other nations might agree that what that does is it conveniently washes away the distinct nationhood of who we are and where we are and in kinship with this land. And it's really problematic. So for me, I prefer to be called by my nation. I am Mohawk of Akwesasne, or the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, or the Iroquois Confederacy. Language matters. Call me by my nation. Don't call me indigenous, because for me, that word is starting to become used against us as a way to continuously wash us out of opportunities and resources. We are here on the land with you. We are not separate. My only experience where BIPOC, Black and Indigenous folks have been working together are my most recent project that I'm working on with the Black Women's Blueprint. And I'm also the founder for the North American Indigenous Center for Culture, Equity, and Economic Development in partnership with them. And we're doing a land back treaty partnership in New York State. And we will be reclaiming and repairing our relations and moving forward within traditions and food sovereignty and lifeways that are natural to this land meaning the Northeast. I want people to think about and maybe look up the Indian Arts and Craft Act of 1990. This is a truth in advertising law that prohibits misrepresentation in the marketing of Indian art and craft products within the US. If you could look that up and read more about that, that wasn't created until 1990. And if you have time to go and look up the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, that was passed in 1978. Whereas the freedom of religion for all peoples is an inherent right fundamental to the democratic structure of the United States and is guaranteed by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. And this was in 1978. We were allowed to practice our ceremonies in our culture. That wasn't long ago. My mother was probably about 24, 25 years old. I was born the next year in 1979. This has detrimental effects on me, my mother, her mother, and the generations prior. We have been stripped from our culture. We have been stripped from our identity, from our languages. And now while we're in an act of reclamation, we need people to keep their hands off of our culture and let us repair and indigenize ourselves back to our natural state and connection with the land. Yeah, 1 minute, okay. There's also another NCAI resolution, the National Congress of American Indian Resolution, PDX 20041. If you could look that up, it's support for requiring proof of tribal enrollment for artists who claim Native American affiliations for grants, exhibition, and cultural arts employment. This was just passed in 2020. Tawny Growing Thunder had just passed that, and I supported her. There's very few that supported her, but I was one. And we pushed that in Washington this past year. And it's important for all to know that, especially institutions, arts institutions and museums and so on and so forth. These are all things to be aware of. These are all means of us trying to protect ourselves as sovereign nations and sovereign people and sovereign bodies in such a violent space. I would like to create better relations I would like to create treaties of ways we can move forward and grow and indigenize and just create balance, because there is none right now. Thank you. End of thought.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I'll be very quick to get to a question. I just want to thank Christina for framing it in a large and international way like that. And so many things have come up, and many of them practical, that sometimes don't get enough airing in discussions on these issues of abolition. And so it's a forum here that has some of its own ways in. And I'm thinking a lot of the question of land and farm and food and healing. That's one piece that seems to have come up a lot. And the question of body and movement, also movement of people as well as individual bodies, I think. And I think the key thing that a lot of us are grappling with, Iakowi posed the question at the beginning, when you get rid of all of that, what do you fill yourself with? Other people, Jonathan talked about new forms, DeeArah about these non-prescriptive models that don't have a prescriptive end, and so on. So, imagining the importance of having that non-prescriptive processual kind of work. And I think what I want to ask is, given all of this, there's an economic situation that we all have to deal with. It's called survival, and we have to balance, I think, maybe going between seeking funds or seeking land or seeking those kinds of things from somewhere, someone. Sometimes not in the best ways, and then doing something that is outside of existing economic and social structures. So mutual aid. The kinds of things that DeeArah was mentioning and is working towards. So I want to ask everybody if they can think a little bit about this question, or tell us a little bit about how to think about, how to go about the question of economic survival outside of structures, or in relation to how do we think and act on those things. I hope that was more or less clear.
I can start and be brief. I think there sometimes an assumption when we think across differences that these practices aren't already happening. Like I think Iakowi has already mentioned that these practices are already happening, and especially fiscally, financially. When I think about the term and the usage of mutual aid now, it doesn't look very dissimilar to my experience of growing up in New York City in strategic abandoned communities that are food deserts, and what kinds of systems develop there, which are community gardens, which are systems of sharing and shared labor that offers opportunities for work where there was not work to perhaps fix somebody's house, and those models build out a shared skill set, places for learning, and other forms of interpersonal opportunities, like, what we term now community safety is a kind of organic development that happens in communities where cops cannot be trusted. So all of these, like the rhizome of problems, do get solved inside of what we consider abandoned communities, and if we want to try to scale up, we're saying, Abou, then I think the practice is figuring out how to keep those voices that are starting in that small fractal involved in the process of scaling up.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I'll add to that and share that this idea of fractal is actually really powerful, and thinking about what it means to create an ecosystem of solidarity, or solidarity ecology or solidarity economy, is really thinking about how to enrich those hyper-local homes, communities, how those agreements, how those equitable approaches to ownership. I'm thinking about our particular model is a worker owner model, which is a way that each person that is a worker owner in our co-op has the same amount of equity in the company. We also may get compensated for our actual labor and sweat equity in that way. But if the organization makes more income or revenue over our expenses, that is reinvested back into the community. That profit or for community profit is reinvested back into the community or the projects, and reinvested back into the vision. And it's not this extractive idea of capital. And so I think this idea of like how is there sustainability created within the smaller home, this idea of home or communities, and therefore that strength can be replicated in a way that is a fractal type of flow, and those networks can be interconnected and support each other. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Okay. Well, thank you. I feel like that's a really important and practical set of considerations for everybody. I also, Iakowi, you wanted to say something? Is that? I'm not seeing everybody well, so.
I had a disruption, so I wasn't able to entirely hear your question.
Okay. Well, I'll repeat it very quickly. Your question, coming off a little bit off of your final comments about economics and grants and treaties, I was asking, how do we think about the question of sort of economic survival, economic organization outside of institutional, corporate, state-based, foundation-based kind of thinking, which many of us are accustomed to. And I was thinking about mutual aid and the work that other people have mentioned on this panel. And I was asking us to think a little bit about that, creating alternatives, since that seems to be so much of what we need to do.
Yeah. So for me here in New York City, I would say like that alternative should be something that has been here for us as Native American people, as Ungwehue people, but has not. It's been absent for a while. And currently, it was my experience at the American Indian Community House, which has, it's came to rough times over the past like 10 years or 7 years. And that's been to the detriment of Ungwehue people here in New York City. And it's a reflection of Ungwehue people beyond New York City, in my opinion, and from what I see and hear. So I think that first and foremost, with all work that people are doing, they should always be consulting and getting consent and being inclusive of Ungwehue leadership from the beginning and in the front lines.
Right.
Because, this is our land. We're not a people that possession and land ownership, it's not natural to us. That's not who we are. But we are a people where power means something different. Power doesn't mean having control over people. Power to us means unity, and that's where the power inlays in our culture and who we are. So I think when people are doing these works of reparation and decolonization, to always be sure that you have Ungwehue folks at the table from the beginning and right to the end, and you are fully consulting, because there's a natural law to this land, the Guyana-Lagoa, the Great Law of Peace. There's a natural law that was here and is the foundation of the United States Constitution. And we really need to, if you all are going to decolonize, it's time to go back and think about, what was lost and bring that forward. And that's what will be new and survive us all. And end of thought.
Okay, thank you. Do we have time for one more question? Are we okay? Okay, I hear no. So I guess we'll end with another round of thanks and of the call to quote Nehemiah to undo the imagination of whiteness and to create rituals and practices and alternative ecosystems, solidarity ecologies, and forms of movement of our bodies and movement of our people that can be supportive, sustainable, and that don't rely on violence, especially the violence of the state and its laws and its institutions. Thank you, everybody, for being with us and doing so much important work.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Abou, for moderating our discussion today. I want to thank all of our speakers, Christina Dawkins, DeeArah Wright, Iakowi Oaks, Jonathan Gonzales, and Niamh Young for everything that you shared with us today. I want to thank our ASL interpreters, Brandon Caden Maddox and Aisha Simpson, and then Savvy from the Viscardi Center. We have a bunch of things coming up next. I know that we have had some technical issues, so we deeply apologize for any technical issues that have happened. We are working through it, and we hope by the end of the lunch period, we should have some of it sorted out. So again, thank you for your grace with working with us through this. But please feel free to visit the program book where the most accurate agenda is held. After this, we have 2 sessions coming up on 1 p.m. and then a debrief for Jonathan Gonzales, so you can talk more about these issues and topics, and then a dance break at 3:45. So be well, take care of yourselves. We'll see you back at 1 o'clock.
Thank you for joining today's sessions. A special thanks to our funders, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Howard Gilman Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council on the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts. A special thanks to our lead sponsor, Con Edison, and our lead dance advocate, Jody Gottfried Arnhold. Subsidies for the education and dance worker ticket tiers are made possible by the Arnhold Foundation. A special thanks to our host and partner level sponsors, Nell Shelby Productions, Gibney, In the Lights, and New York Live Arts. And last, but certainly not least, a special thanks to our justice, equity, and inclusion partners, Art Beyond Sight, Artspace Sanctuary, Asian American Arts Alliance, Center for Traditional Music and Dance, Indo-American Arts Council, the International Association of Blacks in Dance, Lotus Music and Dance, Museum Arts and Culture Access Consortium, National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, New York Foundation for the Arts, and Women of Color in the Arts. Up next, at 12 o'clock, you can take your lunch. At 1 o'clock, we'll begin our afternoon sessions. At 2:30, we'll take a short break, and at 2:45, we'll meet at the daily debrief. At 3:45, you can move your bodies in our daily dance break. At 4:15, you can visit our virtual expo showcase. And at 5:30, we'll have our keynote conversation. Stay connected with us by posting your takeaways on social media using the hashtags DanceSimp, DanceNYC 2021, and DanceSimp 2021. Explore the Whova features by building your agenda of sessions, connecting with other attendees, joining community conversations, and visiting the exhibitor hall. And don't forget to check out our 2021 Symposium digital program book with curated thematic guides. How are we doing? Did you like a session? Use the like feature on your favorite session. Got feedback for us? Take the post-event survey after March 20th and tell us how we did. Need help? Email us at customerservice@dance.nyc. A special thanks to our video asset and streaming partners, Renegade Performance Group, Full Out Creative, and Nell Shelby Productions. Thanks for joining. Keep in touch at dance.nyc.